Welcome back to another preview and prediction for the Georgia Bulldogs. The Georgia Bulldogs are taking on the Kentucky Wildcats this Saturday, October 7th in Athens. Game starts at 7, so it's going to be a night game there in Athens. I think that's a huge thing for Georgia. This game is going to be a really good game. Both teams, obviously Georgia's really good. I know Georgia's had a little bit of their issues the start of this year. But both teams are really good. Kentucky is a very physical team. I think Georgia is going to have their hands full with this Kentucky team. Kirby Smart says each and every year that one of the most physical teams that they play all year long are the Kentucky Wildcats. I mean, I think he said earlier in a press conference earlier this week that there's more guys in the ice bath and working on their sore muscles after the Kentucky game than any other game in the regular season because them Kentucky boys like to hit hard. They're big on the lines and the trenches, and they strike well. So I think it's going to be a very good physical, competitive game. Georgia is a 14.5-point favorite at home against Kentucky in a night game. I'm going to come right out and say it like I usually do. I don't like to beat around the bush. I do think Georgia is going to win this game in home, improving the record to 6-0, Kentucky falling to 5-1. I said in my last recap of the Georgia Bulldogs, until Georgia proves me wrong or proves otherwise, I am not taking them to cover. I am not taking Georgia to cover the 14.5. I've taken them to cover, I'm pretty sure, in every other game, and they did it. They are 0-5 against covering against the spread. So if I had to put my money on it, and I'm not a big bet man, and I usually almost never bet on Georgia games, but if I had to put my money on it, I would not bet the spread. I would take Georgia to win, but Kentucky to cover. But I would stay far away from this line. I do want to get into some stats here. I mean, like I said, Kentucky is a really good physical team. They're good on defense, and they're good at running the ball. But that quarterback for them, Devin Leary, has not looked good this year. I mean, he struggled in every game. I mean, so far, Kentucky has played this year alone. Kentucky has played Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, yeah, Vandy, and Florida. Now, they did put an ass whooping on Florida. And in the first 3 games, there's nothing special. I have been saying all year long that Kentucky is a good team. I think they could easily finish second in the division over Florida. I mean, obviously over Florida, over Tennessee, over Mizzou, over South Carolina. I do think that Kentucky finishes second in the SEC East this year. They were kind of under the radar the first 4 weeks actually, until that Florida game, and they popped on the scene huge during that Florida game because of the way that they beat Florida. I mean, the score for that Florida game ended up being 33-14. Even that score is too close to say what happened in that game. Kentucky ran all over Florida. Ray Davis, their running back, is an absolute beast. I mean, Florida couldn't stop him if their life depended on it. I mean, I said earlier in my recap of that game that it looked like Florida were secretly Kentucky fans, and they were just wanting them to win the way that Ray Davis was able to run against them. I mean, it was... I've already done a full preview prediction breakdown of that game if you want to go back and watch it. But nonetheless, Kentucky has kind of been like underlooked. They weren't even ranked above Florida, even though they were the favorite to win that game. They had a better record. So Kentucky has been overlooked, I think. I do think they are a really good team. I think they're really good at running the ball. But their issues lie in their quarterback. He has not seemed to be able to get it together in pretty much any way this year. He's sitting at 57.7 completion percent for 1,129 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So they're not like the worst numbers, but they're also not the greatest. He has been sacked 4 times throughout this season as well. He just hasn't really been able to get in a consistent flow. He hasn't been able to look good. They haven't been able to move the ball through the air a lot with their quarterback. Now, rushing, they have looked good. They have a total for their whole rushing this year. They have 852 yards rushing on the season, 6.5 average. That's really good. I mean, if you're running the ball for 6.5 yards every time you run the ball on average, that's pretty good. You're way ahead of the chains. And they have 10 rushing touchdowns. So they're really good at rushing the ball. Here's the thing, though. You, first off, cannot become one-dimensional on Georgia and beat them. And secondly, if your main component for your offense is to run the ball, you are not going to do that for 4 full quarters against Georgia. You're just not. You may get away with it in the first, second. I mean, you may get some good yardage, some good first downs, a touchdown or two, but you're not going to be able to do that for 4 full quarters against Georgia. They will end up smothering you, and they will shut down that running game. And this is the issue that Kentucky has had in the past going against Georgia. Even though they're a really good team, they run the same style, the same kind of football, brand of football that Georgia does. A very physical, hard-hitting, run-down-your-throat kind of team. And Georgia is just better from top to bottom. And I don't mean any disrespect against Kentucky. They have better recruits. They have better development. I think they have the better coaching staff, the better program when it comes to football. Georgia just does it better. And that has been Kentucky's issue, is that when all of their strengths are the same as Georgia's strengths and Georgia's just better, it's going to be really hard to beat that team. I think Georgia has won this game, 12 to 13 years straight? I don't know. Georgia owns the series. So that's Kentucky's issue, is that they have the same kind of style of football. They like to run the same brand of football that Georgia does, but Georgia just does it better with better players. And at this point in the season, Georgia's offense is starting to click a little bit better. Now, I will say that Georgia's defense hasn't been as great as I expected them to be this year. They've given up a little bit more points than I'd like to have seen. They've come out to a slow start on offense through all 5 games. Through all 5 games, they come out to a slow start on offense. And I was using the example that Georgia's offense is like an old car with a lot of power under the hood. It's there. It can get going. It just takes a second to get into high gear. It doesn't have the fast acceleration. It's not going to beat you off the line as soon as that light turns green. But once it kicks it into high gear, it's gone, and there ain't no stopping it. It's bye-bye. It's faster than anybody. That's what it seems like Georgia's offense is. And Georgia, for a very important thing for this Georgia team, is that they are now starting to get a lot of their injured players back. Last week, Georgia was down to 1 scholarship running back that played for Georgia. 1. That's not good for any team. And I never want to use injuries as an excuse, but when you're severely limited in a certain Georgia still found a way to win. That's the point. It doesn't matter. Georgia still beat Auburn on the road. Ladd McConkey, who has been out every game this whole season, he made an appearance in Auburn game, and he had 3 targets for 3 receptions. All came on a crucial third down, and he picked it up. I know he at least picked up 2. I think he picked up 3. One of them may not have been a third down, but at least 2 of them I know for sure were on third down. So Ladd McConkey is a go-to guy. Now that he's starting to get healthy, he's starting to work his way back in, that is an extreme weapon for Georgia. And I don't even have to talk about Brock Bowers. Everyone knows Brock Bowers is an elite playmaker. You give him the ball single-handedly, he will win you the game. So Georgia's starting to get key playmakers back on offense. Carson Beck is starting to look like he has a little bit more command of the offense, a little bit more confidence in himself and the decisions that he's making. He also looks very poised in the pocket, and he looks like he's trusting these receivers a lot more. And also, he doesn't get rattled. They have been down the two toughest opponents that they play this year, South Carolina and Auburn. You can sit here and say how tough they are. But they have been Georgia's toughest teams to face this year. They were down in both games. Carson Beck did not get rattled. He didn't look stressed. He didn't look frightened. He looked very composed, poised, and he put on a clinic and won the game for Georgia. His numbers compare, like I said, I just went over Devin Leary's the quarterback for Kentucky. Carson Beck is 72.1 completion percent. That is better than Leary. He's got 1,497 yards, also better than Leary. He's got 7 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So he has a few less passing touchdowns, but a significantly lot less interceptions. And I think I did right here, he's only been sacked 3 times opposed to Devin Leary's 4 times. So Carson Beck overall, to me, by far is the better quarterback than the quarterback for Kentucky, Devin Leary. I don't think it's close. Kentucky is going to try and rely heavily on that run game, and I just don't think that they are going to be able to do that through 4 full quarters of this game. And another thing is that Kentucky seems to be, per game, Kentucky seems to be getting a lot of penalties as well. You cannot come into Georgia, into Athens, into that stadium, especially at night, and rack up penalties. Georgia will make you pay. Did we not learn anything from the last Georgia-Arkansas game? That game was over in the first 10 minutes of the first quarter because Arkansas kept shooting themselves in the foot with penalties after penalties after penalties. If Kentucky comes into this game and racks up penalties, that's going to be very bad. Spell disaster. And I've been hearing a lot that Georgia, and I did just say that Georgia hasn't played the greatest on defense, and they haven't, relatively speaking to where they've been. But I'm pretty sure Georgia's both offense and defense is ranked 16th, 15th in the country. That's still really good. Now, it's not where you want the number one team in the country to be, especially if they're going for a three-peat. But, especially with the injuries that they have and all the changes that have happened in the offseason, that's still really good. Georgia's still a really good team. They're winning. They're undefeated. Same as Kentucky. They're a really good team. And so, the only other thing that, like I said, I just don't think Kentucky has the horses in the barn to compete with Georgia through 4 full quarters. They play the same exact brand that Georgia does, but Georgia just does it better through all steps of the game. The only team that these two teams have had in common is Ball State. I don't really want to use that as, oh, this team did that team did that. So can't really compare that. Kentucky beat Ball State 44-14. Georgia beat Ball State 45-3. So, Kentucky gave up a little bit more points, but it's against Ball State. So doesn't really mean anything. So I think, like I said, I think this game is going to be a really good game. I think it's going to be a very physical, competitive game. I think it is kind of going to go late into the second half. I do think Georgia pulls away, but I do not think that they cover because I have picked Georgia to cover every other game, and they haven't. So I've said until Georgia proves me wrong, I'm not going to pick them to cover the 14.5. What other stats did I have here? Oh, yeah, I do want to get into the rushing yards because, like I said, Kentucky is a very run-heavy team. They want to be able to run the ball. Kentucky for rushing for the whole team has a total of 852 rushing yards, 6.5 average per carry, and 10 touchdowns. Now, that 6.5 average per carry is really good. If you're running the ball, every time you run the ball, you're running for 6.5 yards. That's really good. I just don't think that they will be able to sustain those numbers against this defense. I don't think they're going to be able to set the perimeter on Georgia. And I think through 4 quarters, that interior of that offensive line is going to start to tire and slow down. And Georgia has extreme depth on that defensive line that I do think that they kind of shut this game down. And when you are already coming into a game kind of one-dimensional because your quarterback hasn't been looking the greatest and he's been struggling, so you're kind of already limping. I mean, I wouldn't really call you one-dimensional, but you're basically limping on your other leg. If Georgia can take away your main leg, like it's going to be uphill sledding for the Kentucky Wildcats. Georgia's rushing yards, who I just said Kentucky, they are a little bit less than Kentucky. They have 743 yards for the season. They're averaging 4.4 yards per carry, but they also have 15 rushing touchdowns compared to Kentucky's 10 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, yeah, about the same. Kentucky is a little bit better when it comes to running the ball. And I do think that has been an issue for Georgia because that offensive line hasn't been the best. Now, I do see them start to get better as the game goes on. But point is, and last game, and I talked about this in my recap of the Georgia-Auburn game, Georgia beat Auburn on the road. I have the score here, 27-20. And I'm not making any excuses. If you continue to play that way, you will catch an L. Georgia gave up 2 touchdowns that Auburn took advantage of and went down and scored. Carson Beck also missed a wide open Dylan Bell. That was an easy touchdown. Now, I'm not saying, you fix that. Obviously, of course. The game has already been played. What happens, happens. Turnovers happen. Fumbles happen. Interceptions happen. Overthrows happen in a football game. It's part of a football game. But if Georgia can clean up those turnovers and hit a couple of those deep balls, this could be a very ugly game. And I do think Georgia would cover at that point. If Georgia comes out of this game with no turnovers and they're able to hit a couple, 3 or more deep balls, especially explosive plays to the house, I think Georgia wins this game by 14.5. But I'm not going to predict them because, like I said, every time I predicted them to cover, they have it. But like I said, with all of that being said, this is becoming a very long video. I do think Georgia wins. I am going to take them to win probably something around 34-24. And I think it's going to be a fantastic game, a great game, a competitive game. I'm excited for it. Can't wait. Other than that, fuck you, Kentucky. Over and out.